Good morning. Today is Monday, January 26, 2026. It is 8:15 a.m. We just recently had a snowstorm. It's not really snow, it's ice, so pretty much the streets, you can't drive on it. So, it is what it is, but that's Texas, we're not ready for the cold weather. Um, Other than that, the novel work it's been proceeding. I'm at the final section of the water first draft, and then after that I'll start the final section, the final part. And like I said, this is the first draft, just something rough to get a basic outline, the biggest outline, and kind of get a flow of everything how it's gonna go. And then I'm gonna come back and then I'm gonna start fleshing out the pieces, actually going through and making it more, embellishing it. No, that's not the right word. Embezzling it. I don't know. Embellishing it. Embezzlement. I know one of those is stealing. And now we're not gonna steal stuff. It's gonna be making it better, making it sound better. Refining it. Um. Anyway. That's pretty much it on that. Other than that, the books that I finished 2666. No. Yeah. It like, I mean, it's the writing is good, yeah, but it's just so dense and a lot of the stuff feels pointless. But I get that the reason that he did it this way was to make it feel organic, but make it realistic. But a lot of the stuff could have been removed completely, refined. It's a lot of the stuff that he brought up never gets solved. Maybe if I went back, I have a couple theories. Like, maybe one of the girls that went missing, right? It's one of the girls that gets introduced earlier on. I'm assuming it is, but I don't remember their names because there are so many of them, so many different cases in a section. So maybe if I would have written it down, then maybe it's on there, and that will make it a little bit more important. Maybe there are some things that get cleaned on the background that I missed, but I do see a lot of the links, right, of how certain things happen and certain things came to be, but just the ending and overall, it just didn't, just didn't, uh, yeah, it didn't do it for me. Maybe like I said, if I get older, I know they had a lot of references to like Goth and different artists, right? Maybe if I read Faust or something, maybe I'll get some of the references. Maybe if I've read more books, have a better repertoire under my belt, then maybe I can just uh, get it. Maybe it's something that only somebody with experience in the field might get. I don't know, but at the moment I'm not going back to reread it. There's no way. Anyway, so I'm reading Moby Dick, Moby Richard, and I'm reading The Magic Mountain. Now those books are good so far. The Magic Mountain, I still don't know. Like, I'm going into that one blind. I don't know anything about this book, so it's a complete surprise. I don't know what to expect, and I'm actually pleasantly surprised. Like, the writing is really good. It's phenomenal, and there's so much, um, not philosophy, but there's just so much knowledge in this book so far. So much wisdom, like, it's the right word, on this book. And of the Christening basin, that section, that chapter, whatever you want to call it, that is one of the best sections I have read. At least for me, it resonated strongly with me, right? And how the basin, it represents more than just the basin, right? It represents a link between all of the different generations, going back to great 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 grandfathers, right? Different owners, all of the people in the family being, Christen into this bowl, right? So it's a connection to it, and it just goes to show. And this is my personal belief, right? That sentimental values, actual, deep ingrained value to something, is worth more than monetary means, right? Yeah, you can buy a gold chain, with all of this, whatever. You can buy the new Rolex, whatever. But if you put a sentimental value behind it, then it's what really matters, right? If you buy a Rolex not because of the brand or because of something, right? But you buy it because you reached a goal. Like, let's say, hey, if I can make it, if I can complete my doctorate or something like that, right? I'll get me this watch. If I can advance my career to this point, I'll get me this watch, or this car, or this house, or this thing, right? It's not so much about the monetary value of the thing. It's the sentimental value that gets attached to it. And yeah, it was so well done. And then there was another section in the same section. There was another part where the Hans, I think that's the name, right? Where he compares his grandfathers, like he remembers his grandfather not as he saw him, right, in real life at the final his final days, but as he saw him in a painting, right, when he considered him to be at his prime, when he considered him to be at his best, right, and whatever he saw later on in life was a faulty version, a version that was that was not him, right? That it was just a reflection, you can say, a shadow or something of his true self, right? What he used to be, what he was, and that's how he wished to remain, to remember his grandfather. And I'm not doing justice to it, like reading it and actually understanding the meaning and going through the words, like it is reading incredible. Moby Richard, Moby Richard, it's that book. It's also really good. There's, I think, for it was written in 1851. I think it was, for it to be written in that age and pushing a lot of these different areas, right? With prejudices and the thing about races and different cultures, different beliefs, different values, and being able to bring and bring a prose, a proposition, a proposition, bringing a proposition to it, and putting a case against it, and bringing this to a wider audience. It was very good, you know. And yeah, I'm actually enjoying those books. So yeah. Um, Other than that, what am I missing? Oh, I'm not gonna go too much into this. Again, I'm gonna keep this more private, but I just wanna mention I do have a new job. After the probationary period where they're testing me out, and all that stuff, and with pay, bonuses, increases depending on what kind of jobs I want to take or whatever shifts. I'm gonna be making 25% to potentially up to 40-ish% more than where I used to work. So that's always good, right? I hope that I'm gonna work hard, and I hope that I can that my work speaks for itself. I hope that I can prove myself, but you know yeah, that's all I'm gonna say on that. Um, Other than that, there's still two more things I want to do. One, I just want to read some old stuff that I wrote. Normally I don't do this stuff, so this is out of my comfort zone. And then after that, I want to have a recollection, kind of certain things in my life, from the past to the present. But first, the writing. Hopefully, it not very good. It's old stuff, but you know it's what it was important to me, and it still kind of is. It was a part of me at that point, and nowadays as well, I guess. Okay, so this one, oof, I can't believe I'm doing this. So these are poems, right? I wrote because whenever I have things in my head, or I just have inspiration that pops up, or anything like that, I like to write. I write, like I like to say, I write cheesy poetry. So here it goes. The first one, right, I called it nube, cloud, right? Soy como una nube volando con el viento, con mi alma encadenada a mis sentimientos. Como quisiera que me tomaras en tus brazos, pero me convierto en el aire en tu abrazo. Forma, quisiera cambiar con tus elementos, convirtiendo estos sentimientos en un diamante brillante como el hielo. Quiero sentir tu aliento sobre mi cuerpo, mojar tu vida con este amor que llevo dentro, como una nube cayendo, como una lluvia cayendo lento. So, yeah, that one's about a cloud, and it has special meanings attached to it. I kind of butchered the reading, kind of nervous, kind of, whatever, but, that's one of them. And then the other one, also in Spanish, well, I can read the English, translation to it, right? It doesn't quite hit the same, but it's like a translation to it. So the English translation to that one is, I am like a cloud floating with the wind, with my soul chained to my thoughts. How I wish you took me into your arms, but I become wind in your embrace. Form, I wish I could change with the elements, converting these feelings into a diamond dazzling like the ice. I want to feel your breath on my body, wet your life with this love I have inside of me, like rain falling slowly. Again, the English version, right, doesn't capture the the rhymes. Is that the right way to say it? And yeah, and this goes to another thing, right? Which I believe that books can lose their essence when they get translated, right? As translations happen, interpretations and stuff like that, things get changed around. And the reason I say this is because I recently ordered a copy of Don Quixote de la Mancha, by Cervantes, which is it's a one of the great works of literature, but it was originally written in Spanish, right? And I think that I'm gonna read the Spanish version to see the actual intended, or well, the closest version to it as it was intended. Of course, it's gonna be modernized and updated for modern Spanish, because old Spanish and new Spanish, just like English, it's different, right? Uses different words, uses different stanzas, and formatting, stuff like that. But hopefully, I can get the real essence. And that's something I'm also thought about for the book 2666. Maybe if I read it in its original intended language, I would have liked it more. But I'm not gonna go back to it right now. But it's something that's been weighing on my mind. Okay, now the second poem. Okay, this one is called Anhelo, right? Which translate to yearning, I guess. Which, yeah, it kind of a little scandalous, I guess. Okay, here goes. Anhelo por tu calor sobre mi cuerpo, tus besos en mi pecho, tu aliento acariciándome mi cuello, mi espalda decorada con rasguños de tus dedos. Deseo el dolor en la madrugada, el sabor de tus labios en mi lengua, tu esencia guardada en mi cama, amaneciendo a tu sonrisa en la mañana, perdiendo en la reflexión del amor en tu mirada. So, that one, it's again, it's just it's a poem about yearning for someone. I don't have a English translation, but I can like do one. I just don't want to right now. But yeah, that's something else I wrote. Now that we got the embarrassing and cheesy part out the way, now I can speak about the other stuff I wanted to speak. Okay, so this is gonna be a reflection kind of deal about, I don't know, just where I kind of like where I started. It's not gonna be a full biography or anything like that. It's just gonna be like going over certain parts of my life, and certain events. I'm not gonna say that they're the most pivotal, but I think to me they might be. Some of them are, some of them are not, and they all changed. So here's the deal, right? I'm gonna start off elementary school, right, somewhere around there. So here we go. When I was young, I've always been a reader, right? That's never changed. I still remember when I was in elementary school, and they used to have those reading competitions to see how many words you can read per second, etc., etc. And I was always like one of the top fast readers, right? And I read a lot and all that stuff. I was a quiet kid at the beginning, right? And kind of now I've fallen back to that. I guess more reserved in my consonants and the way that I handle myself. But yeah, you know, I was a quiet kid. I kept to myself, and you know, but anyway, trouble still falling. Finds you for whatever reason. I remember I was talking to this girl. It was just another classmate, nothing like that. Just talking to it, and started conversation, and for no reason at all, like this girl just grabbed the pencil and she stabbed me at maybe this side or this. I don't remember. I had a cut. I think it was this side. I had a cut that went through, and quite for some many years to go, they like had a nickname called Scarface because of the scar, right? But whatever. And that was one thing that happened, right? And I find that interesting because to this day, it reminds me of, yeah, I had a scar, I had a mark on my face, but they heal, right? You don't see it anymore. And that is to say that as you go through life and you learn things that might have left a mark behind, they will disappear over time, right? So just kind of go through it. Later on, another memory that I have a really strong recollection was, um and a real impact on my life was one day. All right, so I was, before middle school. It was still elementary. I think it was like sixth grade or fifth or sixth grade, right? I don't remember how old I was, but I was going to, from the apartments where I stayed at. There was like some business section, right, where they had a Family Dollar and stuff like that. So I was going over there to go get snacks and candy and stuff, right? I had some Jordans on and whatever. And in this encounter, somebody, like a group of people, they were like, "Hey, come over here," and you don't do that shit, right? Where I grew up at, if somebody tells you to come, talk to them for a second, you get the fuck out of there. So anyway, you know, I was like, I was like, hell no, and I kind of booked it, but uh, the guy pulled out a gun on me, and this, like I can act tough, all that shit, but that was the first time I had seen like a real gun. And I stayed at Family Dollar and in the shopping center way longer than I would have, just because I'm like, I don't want to fucking bump into them again, right? So after I went back, I actually, I didn't see them anymore, and I was like, okay. But this left a mark on me, and then from there I started to binge eat, right? I didn't know it at the time, but it did cause a lot of stress or something. So I started binge eating, and I became more isolated because of that, right? I was like, I ain't going out there, so I got fat. The it is what it is. I ate a lot, and I think I was like pushing more than 200 pounds, right? And I became very very fat. But then I, like, again, time heals it and stuff, and then and it was kind of like pressure as well, from students, like they're like, oh, bullying never helps, but it helped me, right? um, People were roasting my ass, because of my weight and all that stuff. And I noticed that I was, that I was like middle school. I was, now, and then I'm like, I noticed that I started to get into girls, right? I'm like, oh, I find her attractive, but they don't find me attractive because I was overweight. So you know what happens, right? I started to cut back on the eating, right? And then I also worked during the summer. That also helped, but mostly the cutting back. My portion size on the bowl, if it was a big bowl full, I cut it back down to, like a smaller bowl and not even full. All snacks, all stuff like that, I just cut off. And very quickly, I also started doing working out, and I did push ups wrong. I lifted weights that were too heavy. I didn't have a good form or anything like that. So I kind of injured my wrist. I'm still injured to this day. Okay, so yeah, like I was saying, it doesn't really bother me anymore, in the sense that I guess it kind of does. I'm not gonna say it doesn't, but I'm not as self conscious of my figure. It left me with stretch marks and all that stuff, but it don't really matter too much anymore. But the thing that it does bother me with is, like, I have to be careful with, certain workouts, and it's gonna probably gonna keep on following me around my whole life. But I got in shape, right? And you know, yeah. So that's why just kind of going with that. Um, then from there, it boosted my confidence a lot, right? It's impressive, right? I went from being more introverted because of those things that happened and everything, and I started to once again be more extroverted, and have more confidence and energy. So it just goes to show you that working out gives you better energy. You feel good about yourself. You see yourself getting into better shape, looking a little bit better, and it does help. So that's what I'm a big advocate of. Just staying healthy and working out. But I'm not one of those healthy buffs. I'll eat a pizza, a whole pizza by myself any day. Um, but anyway, um, from there, I started also. It's just where you grow up, right? I was, you wear Jordans, the dress code and whatever. You try to be cool. You try to fit in, and whatever culture you grow up in, or whatever area you work. You grow in the area that I grew up. You know, everybody that dressed up. Try to be like gangster style, whatever, right? I want to be gangsters, right? Wanksters, whatever. Um, the same thing was for me, right? I was going down like a bad route, and it's one of those things that it was just going down the bad route because I was trying to be cool. I was trying to mimic others. But the next pivotal event that happened was that my cousin, and his brother, right, which I idolized at this point, right, because they had money, they had cars, they always had all this stuff, right. Uh, but it was easy money, and he got my cousin. I'm not gonna say his name, but my cousin, he charged at a police officer when he was high on cocaine, right, and he got shot. Like a whole clip was unloaded on him. So he died from that. And seeing him in the coffin, that really, it was a shock. The shock therapy that really kind of like snapped me back. And it's unfortunate, but because there were he was family, right? But it helped me get back on the right path. And his brother, unfortunately, right, he didn't see it. When his brother got shot and killed, he was in I think a penitentiary at that point. Not I don't think it was quite jail. I don't think he was old enough for jail at that moment, but I don't remember. And he kept on following those things, and currently he is in prison, serving at I don't know. He has at least another 10, 20 years. You know, so yeah, it's they're my family, and I still love them, but it's like just seeing that it could have been me, right? And it was a good. I got a good thing out of it, that I kind of like shocked me out of that. Anyway, in school, going through that, right, I was always I became very friendly, right, in the sense that I spoke to everybody. And when I say everybody, I mean everybody. I spoke to people that were in opposite sides of different things, right? Like some of them were like, oh, I represent blue. The other ones, I represent red. Whatever, I represent this gang, or whatever. And I was not into that, right? Like, so they were chill with me, but I was always surrounding that. I had friends who were big book nerds, right? Big manga readers. you know uh and they introduced me to Naruto and One Piece, and from there I went to reading that. I didn't know about manga and stuff like that, right? I was reading Harry Potter and other stuff, like think Percy Jackson and whatnot. But then I started reading manga, became a weeb, I guess you can call it. But at the same time, I had friends that were like the biggest nerds like that, right? And then I had other friends that were who were cutting a line on the cafeteria table during lunch. So you know it's those kind of things, right? And that is just to say that I've always been, and I was more, I need to get back to it, right? I was always very open-minded with different people, right? Middle school, one of my best friends, Amanda Panda. Well, damn, I didn't want to say names, but okay. Um, I don't think you're gonna find her with that name, right? She was bi, which growing up like in a hood and stuff like that, especially in a Hispanic and mostly black and Hispanic area, that's like normally very frowned upon. So it's one of those things. So, but I was chill with her, right? Like we were cool. To this day, I always wish her the best, right? She was real cool, and I was always surrounded, by other people, right? If another friend, not his whole name, but uh, uh, nickname Isandro, right? Dude was also bi into that shit, and you know I also knew people that were for different things, right? I hung up around with different cultures, right? We only had like one or two white kids in our school, and I was cool with them. I had a crush on an Asian girl in middle school as well. Don't know where she went through high school, right? She went somewhere else. And through high school, different crushes with different people, right? The, my first girlfriend was, she was black, cheerleader. Well, my first, like actual real girlfriend, right? Not, the other stuff, but and yeah, it's just like that. Like I've always been very I try to be accepting and try to be open minded, but sometimes you'll get people that really push you, and it's not because of their whatever, but there's some people that they just don't understand boundaries, or they push and those I don't like, and it's not because of what they believe in or what their values are and all that stuff. It's because they don't understand not to impose it on other people. That's something I don't like. So yeah. And recently I've become a little bit more introverted again, but it's not because I don't like people. It's just because I want to have my peace. I try to keep my groups short, a lot smaller, so that I don't have to deal with a lot of issues. But yeah, it's one of those things, right? And now to the next point. After that, after the my cousin passed away and all that stuff, I I did a flip, right? Like I started changing my ways. I started trying to dress like like proper whatever, right? The people were like, oh, you dress like a white kid, right? You dress like whatever. You went to Sunday mass, right? I started I traded in the baggy clothes and whatever. Started to try to dress more professional, more that, and it was like one of those things, like if you want dress like for what you want to become, and that's what I was doing. um but like it just whatever, and I started to try to change, but this was around high school. I think it was sophomore year ish, somewhere around there, and by that end it's kind of like damage gets done, and I never fully recuperated from me trying to me not doing work and all that stuff. I wasn't dumb, right? I still made it in the top 30 in the school, but if I would have actually worked hard, like I had friends, I was friends with the top students in the class, and I helped them out with their homework a lot of times, right? So if I would have actually kept, focused, then I think things would have been a lot different, right? If I would have never, if I would have just been, going, if I would have had a good role model for school, I would have, focused up, and I'm pretty sure I could have made it at least to the top 10, if not, to a little bit higher. And then that would have helped me out with my school and all that stuff. But it is what it is. um but yeah, then uh from there I was working after I graduated. I was working construction for a bit, got LASIK done on my eyes, right? I used to wear glasses, but contacts will dry out my eyes, glasses will fall off everywhere. I saved up for LASIK and I got it done. Best decision, one of the best decisions I've ever made. And then after that, we were living in an apartment at this point still, and we needed to find a new place, right? They were basically kicking us out. I got two full time jobs for a bit to help pay for the house. Searched on Refin, but like pretty much on my free time trying to look for the best deals. We found a foreclosed home. Um, we went to a lot of different houses, to be honest, but this one, the one that we finally got, we went to a foreclosed home. It was on our price range, and it was the bones were all right. You're like, okay, we can make do with this. Needs a lot of work, but we can make do. And we pulled the trigger, and I was 19 at the time, right? 19ish. And yeah, so the house is under my name, but and I never considered this my house because I'm gonna just give it up to my parents or somebody else, right? Like you know I'm not gonna uh, sweat that kind of stuff because I've seen the way that my uncles are currently fighting over some land that my grandfather has. My grandfather's older in age; he's like 80 something, 85ish, I think, and he doesn't have much more. I don't think he was gonna have much more time. But all of my uncles are fighting for land, right? Who's gonna get the land? Who's gonna do whatever? El rancho, the way that they call it, right? And I don't want the same, right? So this house, whatever, it's like whoever needs it, they can, have it, whatever's the best way. But I'm not gonna, like to me, I consider this everyone's home, everybody's house, and yeah. Um, but during this time that I was saving up for this house, this is something else that happened. This is another pivotal moment and a really big one, right? Because through the whole house era, through this whole era, I was probably the most hustle, I have ever been. I was extremely hardworking, had this extremely positive attitude. People gravitated towards me. It's the best way that I can explain it, right? And I uplifted people, right? But then, uh, for my own, mental weakness, I was still young and wasn't, mentally prepared for any of that stuff. Um, we went through a lot of, stressful times, right? My mother went through depression, and that caused a lot of fighting in the house, constant fighting, right? Um, she tried to commit suicide a couple times, whether whatever, and that really did cost me a lot of harm, right? And it caused a lot of harm to my brothers as well. They two of them had to go through therapy for years to come, right? I myself went just once when I was in college, I think once or twice. It was twice. One was a one-on-one session, and another one was a group session. But it did affect me a lot. I considered a lot of, yeah. But it was just that it was a bad place at home, and you know it just it was like it really did put me in a terrible spot. And then I try to cling on to other people, right, for support. But it's like my father's never been someone that's like that. So, and my brothers were going through similar shit, right? So it's not really much people to turn to, right? And you can't go to uncles or whatever and all that stuff. They don't believe in that shit, right? They don't believe in depression or anything like that. They're like just men up and all that bullshit. So anyway, um I try to find different people to cling to. One of them was a girl I was talking to at that time, my girlfriend, kind of, you know, and we were kind of, I pushed too much onto her, trying to do it right, which was not the right thing. And when she put distance between us, right, she kind of like slowly started to fade and ghost me, right? People call it ghosting. That really affected me, and I just felt that people, like I just felt that I became like very closed off. And then I was like, okay, I don't want to get hurt. So if I don't allow people in, if I put this tough exterior, if I act this way, you know, then I won't get hurt again, which wasn't the right way, but that's the way I handled it. And I burnt a lot of bridges. I cut off a lot of people, and I went through a lot of, you know, changes. And I went and I fully focused on my school, my work, and I guess, you know, it's what got me through my degree in a sense as well, because that shit was hard. No lie, that was hard. Um, but anyway, you know, from that experience, you know, I went through a lot of reflection, and you know, then it took me a while to actually come back and start opening up and start letting people in. And I always say this, right? And to this day, to this day, a second, to this day, this book, right, was one of the big reasons that I was able to overcome it. This simple introductory to his work helped me out, and it helped me deal with a lot of thoughts, minds, you know, and just be able to face myself, face my shadow in a sense, right? That's what he calls the shadow, and allow myself to, you know, change. And yeah, again, adapting again. So I went through a whole phase where I was shut off, right? Extremely cold, extremely whatever. And to be honest, during this phase, right, this is I guess, you know, a joke, but not kind of a joke. This is when I got hit on the most by girls, right? In general, like girls gravitated toward me because I was cold to them, which I, you know, it just I do what you will with that, right? But when I was like an asshole cold, I didn't, you know, attach myself emotionally to people. It was probably the time where I had the most girls hit on me. Which, do that with what you will. I don't know if, you know, if it was just the place, you know, the things that I was doing, but that's, you know, how it was. But then, you know, from there, I grew out of there. I started, you know, getting a little bit happier. But then, you know, I started to really question the way that I acted. I'm like, was I too cold? Was I too, you know, whatever? So I lost a lot of, you know, my interaction, you know, with people, right? Because I didn't, you know, connect with people. I had closed myself off, and it's something that I'm still trying to battle till this day, right? But I feel like I'm a lot better now. But you know, it's one of those things where, right, you it's like a pendulum, right? It swings back and forth, back and forth, back and forth until it kind of like, you know, finds, you know, a nice common ground. And that's something that I still struggle with, right? Because, you know, it's like, am I acting too weak? Am I acting too strong? Am I being an asshole? Am I being, you know, like, you know, too overbearing, you know, too sweet, too clingy, you know, because the clinginess came from my relationship, you know, trying to cling to people and, you know, overburdening people. Or am I too cold when, you know, I went through that phase where I just, you know, didn't attach to people at all. I just cut, you know, all kind of like, you know, emotional connections, and I became stoic, I guess you can call it, whatever, you know. But it was just like one of those things, right? And I think that's the thing about humans, right? We change over time, we learn, we adapt, and we grow. And I feel like right now I'm finding a good common ground. Like, you know, I have a lot of hobbies, right? Like that I'm trying to get into. Like I love reading, I love writing. I'm writing that novel. I I'm doing more stuff like working on my truck, you know, fixing it up. That's good for me. Um, just doing stuff that I enjoy. Going, you know, hiking, just going for a drive, clears my head up. And I'm starting to open up, and I'm starting to, you know, be again, you know, more. It's not the not I'm not the same as, you know, when I was younger, but you know, being more of, you know, something that, you know, like, I think I'm working towards the best version of myself now, but you know, it's a work in progress. But all of this is just to say that that people change, people grow, people go through so many turbulations and so many mistakes and errors, and I'm gonna go through a lot more. I'm gonna fall through a lot of pitfalls. I'm gonna say a lot of things that later on I'm gonna be like, I don't agree with. I'm gonna say some stuff that people will not agree with, right? And I don't agree with most things. I've noticed recently, maybe this is just me seeing it online or stuff, or just in general, but I've noticed that it's become very polarizing. Just in general, either red, left or right, blue or red, this or that, whatever, right? Instead of people looking at things and having a their own mindset, they go and they kind of go into a ship, like a, what's it called, sheep herd mentality, a tribe mentality, where they all kind of like just follow one person that they agree with, and then they start trying to agree with everything that they say. And if somebody on the herd says, "Hey, I agree with you on this, but not on this," then they get outcast, or they have this like I look at it like the modern day Salem witch trials, where people just piled on them, right? Especially on online, and it's like people are not clones of each other. People do not all have the same beliefs. They do not have the same upbringing, the same anything like that. How can you expect that? But it seems that a lot of people, they just they're like, I've seen it recently. It's a lot more apparent, even in the places that I work, right? They just kind of like are isolated into groups, or different, even different schedules, different groups, different, even different buildings altogether, different sections, based because of that, right? Because they trying to they don't feel comfortable, I guess, working with other people that have different beliefs. And then if you put people like that into echo chambers, right? You can consider an echo chamber, whatever, where they're all kind of like just saying the same stuff, agreeing, and nobody brings in a differing point of view, or brings a case for, maybe like, hey, maybe we're going too extreme on this. Then you get some very extreme things that happen, right? Which is very unfortunate, and I don't think it's good. But that's just kind of like what I've been thinking. To close this off, I just want to say, that I just feel, right? Well, no, I'm not gonna go with that. I'm gonna just say that I'm me, right? That's basically it. I'm not gonna be like claiming, oh hey, you know, like I'm this or I'm that, right? I'm not the manliest man, but at the same time, that's that's not something I'm gonna change. It seems that either I'm not too manly for I'm way too manly for some groups, and I'm not manly enough for others. And this thing, am I freaking? Oh, I'm looking pale like a ghost. Um, and it's something that it's like just learn to accept myself, and not try to follow groups and stuff. That's the biggest thing, because I've noticed, right, like I do a lot of hobbies that they're like, oh wow, if you do this, you're whatever, right? That they're extremely masculine or something. I'm like, okay. And then I do things that are people consider extremely feminine, right? Like reading, for whatever reason nowadays, people that are like, oh, that's stuff that girls do, right? Or whatever. And I'm like, I guess writing is poetry, right? Same shit. People are like, oh, that's extremely girly. And you get a lot of insecure ass people who just like straight up they just denounce, or they would just keep everything away. That's not me, right? Yes, I write, yes I read, yes I write poetry and stuff like that, but at the same time, I'm like, I like to work on my truck. I'm handy as just about any other man out there, any other person, right? Like I can go into the wall, fix water pipes. I know how to do that shit. You know, I know how to go through on clog a toilet. I know how to lay down tile. I know how to work on sheetrock. I know how to, you know, pretty much everything. That's from a Mexican upbringing, right? We're very handy. You know, you have to be, you know, either that or you got to pay somebody else to do it. And shit, you know, if there ain't no money to pay somebody to do it, then you do it yourself. So, um, very handy. And a lot of people are like, oh, that's working on cars, knowing about cars. That's something a man does. You know, I don't agree with those ideas, right? I think that's so stupid. Um, but you know, it is what it is. You know, that's just the way that culture is. And like I said, you know, I grew up in Hispanic and, you know, surrounded by Hispanics mostly and blacks, right? So in those cultures, without a doubt, right, they're extremely, you know, what's it called? What's the right word? Machistas? Something like that. Chavist, I guess, was a word I've heard before, in which, you know, you show any kind of deal. To this day, right? Like, my father doesn't, you know, do hugs and shit like that, right? He does not, um, he does not, and he will not, like, you know, understand, you know, kind of like stuff like, you know, oh, mental issues or whatever like that. He would just tell you, man the fuck up, right? And that's the way that, you know, I grew up. I'm not like that, right? I think it's maybe from all the books that I read and those ideas that they put into my head, right? But you know, it's always these conflicting, you know, ideas, different conflicting beliefs and values that I'm trying to, you know, take into my head, weigh them, and try to find what is it that resonates with me, what is my, you know, what is actually my belief, and what is something that, you know, I'm just echoing, you know, from somebody else, right? And that's what it is. I know for a fact that I don't want to be somebody that brings hate, right? I know for a fact that I don't want to be somebody that, that, you know, uh, attacks others or anything like that. And I know that I'm not for a fact gonna be somebody that is insecure and, you know, brings others down so he can, you know, make himself look better. That ain't me, you know. And you know, I'm trying to work through some issues right now as well, always, right? But yeah, that's just what life is, right? You keep on learning, you keep on going, and trying to find what is it that you find, right? Going back to feminine and masculine things, right? If I speak certain ways around certain people, right, in different places that I worked, um, if I try to speak in a more, if I spoke in the voice that I was used to, right? Because, you know, I worked in construction, I worked in, you know, like that extremely masculine, right? If I was speaking certain circles, certain groups, then some people found that, you know, aggressive, right? So I toned it down, and then, you know, then you have other people that are like, oh, now he's being, you know, like, you're whatever, I'm not gonna say the words, but, you know, because you're speaking a lot more, you know, calm or softer. And I'm like, you know, it's like one of those things like, dude, you're like, change up or something around the people you hang around with, right? But I guess right now what you're seeing right in this video is the closest you are gonna see um to who I am in a sense, right? But not quite fully, because there's this is me being, you know, calm and, you know, collected, right? Being, you know, whatever, just inside and whatever. But the person that I am, once I actually, you know, like, once that confidence hit boost, or, you know, I'm whatever, I can be extremely outgoing, right? Even though I'm introverted, I'm extremely outgoing with people that I uh I'm already cussing, you know, people that I fuck with, right? So I don't know, it's just something that's been weighing on my mind, right? Like, oh, because, you know, like, the whole idea of, you know, this stuff. And yeah, it's just what it is, right? Also, the clothes you wear, right? You wear a simple hat, and then all of a sudden, it changes, people's perception of you extremely, right? Just the hat, right? And you're like, okay, it's, I guess, right? Or, oh, whatever. But it is what it is. Okay, now I'm just rambling on. Okay, let's just close this off. So all I'm trying to say is that I'm changing. Um, I am very, open to discussion always, right? I'm very open to to who I am as a person as well, right? Or what I believe in. Doesn't mean I'm right, but I will tell you what I believe in at that moment. So if somebody were to ask me a question like, "Oh, what do you think about this subject? What do you think about that?" I'll give it, right? But I try to be, I stay, always constantly trying to grow as a person, right? If somebody tells me, that's, I don't believe that, and then we have a simple conversation or discussion, and I agree with some points, I'm always willing to learn, no matter how hard it hits me. But yeah, that's just me. And some of the stuff that that I went through, like I said, it's like I have a lot of other stuff like everybody else, right? Life is long, and short at the same time, but it's just what I've gone through, some of the stuff that I've gone through. I need to splice the videos because you know I messed up in the other one, so I have to fix it. We'll see. All right. See y'all next time, or see me next time, I guess.